G'day everyone, Dicko here with another kick-ass walkthrough. In today's video, I'm going to break things up a little bit and talk about something other than 3D shit for a moment. You may find me do this from time to time as I find gaps in basic workflow or creative knowledge in artists who wish to create not only 3D art, but stories, imagery, and other stuff as well. So this video is an introduction of sorts. It's a first in probably many, where I show different kinds of apps you can add to your creative tool belt to make you a better artist. Which brings me to, well, one of the obvious ones, and that is image editing and Photoshop. Now I know there's a bunch of vids out there on using Photoshop, but I just want to add my point of view and point out a couple of things that not only make life easier, but also offer perspective on why things like Photoshop remain at the top of the pack when it comes to industry standard tools. This isn't to say that there aren't amazing alternatives out there, and I've spoke about those at length in the past, but there's just some things that Photoshop does better than anything else out there. So let's begin. So what I want to talk about today really is about non-destructive image editing, and to be honest, Photoshop kind of does that better than anything else out there. Not only because of its robust layering system, but also just the tools you can use to, get things done quickly. And so today we're going to do some basic image editing. So I'm going to introduce you to Photoshop, what you can do with it, the kind of cool stuff that it now has, especially with the AI-driven sort of face detection stuff. So let's go ahead and go through that. So I'm just going to make an A4 page and create that. And let's do a quick little tour and show what this thing does. What can you do with this app? And it's, this is going to be the very basic stuff. So on the side here, we can talk about the tools you can use. So there's selection tools, paint tools, blur tools, gradient tools, you name it, and a whole bunch of other crap down here. I mean, I wish they didn't compress it like they do now, but like, there's a reason, I guess. There's just so many different tools out there. So, dodge, burn. I mean, some of these are like, basic sort of tools, but there's, things within these tools that make it special. At the top here, you have your tool properties, and then we have stuff like history, we have fonts and characters, you name it. And then we have our layer system here. So pretty consistent UI across, something that you might be more familiar with outside of Photoshop. But what I want to talk about is really about how to edit images non-destructively within the software. And some of this is going to be the nuts and bolts sort of stuff that Photoshop is just really good at. So first thing we need to do is just find something to edit. And I want to introduce you as well to other services out there or other apps out there or websites that you can easily start to do concept development with, do image editing with, practice with. And one of my favorite sites for that is Pexels. And Pexels is one of the coolest things to come out of a free and open internet, in my opinion. It's basically like the epitome of sharing quality content with other people and just growing your own brand. And also, like, if you want to be a photographer and you want to show your work and get people to use it, it's a great way to get yourself out there as well. And the cool thing about Pexels is that you can search for almost anything out there. So Pexels, in this case, I'm going to try and find a portrait. So let's have a look and find a portrait photo that will work for me. And I want to try and find a portrait that, is pretty clear, like it can be readable. This one was pretty good. Something like this one would be okay. I'm not keen on the lines, so I'm not going to use that one. But I'm just going to try and have fun with this. So any interesting faces will work fine. So let's have a quick squiz. This one will do fine. I'm going to go with this one here. I'm going to download this. And this is the cool thing about Pexels is that unlike, say, iStock photo or, those sort of things where you pay to get stock photos, you actually get to see who took the photos, and you get to see what other photos they worked on. And you can see this guy's an awesome photographer, and you can always get in contact with these photographers if you need to get something done bespoke by that artist, which is a really cool way of sort of sharing work and sharing ideas and also collaborating with others, in the future. So there's some really cool stuff you can do with that. So actually, I might. Oh no, I'll stick with the original photo. So I'm going to download this photo. I'm going to save this somewhere on my desktop. I'm going to make a new folder. Call it Photoshop Demo. Come on, Windows, do your thing. There we go. And I'm just going to save it into a new folder and call that stock photos. This is one of the other cool things about Pexels as well, is that it actually keeps the name of the artist in the file. So if you ever have to go back to that website and find more photos from that artist, you can see that in this case, Gabtapik, I hope I'm saying that right, has taken this photo, and you can give credit where credit's due, all that sort of thing. So I'm just going to save that photo and work with that. So let's jump back into Photoshop. And I'm going to grab that file. And just drag it into the canvas here. Now you will find that one of the coolest things about Pexels as well is that the resolution of these files are massive. They're absolutely huge, and they're really clear, which is also super cool. They're super sharp, super clear, and just all around good quality photos. That's another great thing about Pexels. Even though it's meant to be a Photoshop video, it's still a good example of where you can find decent photography to do some kit bashing with, for instance. So the first thing I'm going to do for now is just remove. You can see here that you can add it adds this file as a new layer inside of Photoshop. All I want to do for now is just get rid of this little icon here. Right now it's set as a smart layer. I'm going to keep it as just a basic layer because I want to be able to edit this photo in a specific kind of way. So I'm just going to right click on this layer and just rasterize that. Now, the reason I want to bring up a portrait is because I want to show you some of the AI driven stuff that this software can do as well. But before we do that, let's talk about color grading, changing colors, making things, taking the image and changing it in different ways dynamically without destroying the original image. Because the basic instinct in Photoshop when you're editing images is to go to the image tab and go to the adjustments and then do your adjustments like so. Change your saturation, that sort of thing, etc. The problem with that though is that it's a destructive workflow. And what I mean by that is that what you're doing to the image, the colors you're doing, the colors you're changing, the lines you're drawing on it, if you're doing any painting over an image, it actually is destroying the actual image. So you can't go back to the original and do any changes if you need to. So what I want to bring up is the idea of adjustment layers. And yes, there are other apps that do adjustment layers, but I feel like adjustment layers in Photoshop are kind of handled just a little bit better. So how do you work with adjustment layers? Well, firstly, if you may notice, the interface just changed, and that is because I want to bring up the adjustment tab. All you got to do to bring that up is just go to your little button up here and just switch the layout from whatever it may be, a preset, but I'm just going to go with Essentials, and Essentials will bring up that Adjustments tab. You can also access adjustment layers through the Layer tab, the Layer button down here. Go to New Layers, and then do whatever you need to do. But in this case, I want to show some basic color grading. So in this case, I might want to change, say, the color balance of this photo, and you may see that it adds a new layer over here. Now, in order to change the colors, all you got to do now is click on this little icon there, and you'll get this little tab at the top. And that allows you to change your midtones, your highlights, your shadows, etc. At least with this particular adjustment layer. So for instance, if I were to go and change my shadows to be a bit darker, you'll see that the blues are starting to pop out in those colors. If I try to change the midtones of my colors and make them more yellow, it'll pop back, or more green in the midtones, that sort of thing. So you can do some really cool stuff with this, and we're going to do some pretty extreme stuff with this in a moment. But the cool thing about adjustment layers is that it doesn't destroy the original image, which is great if you want to do some basic kit bashing, compositing, doing some early concept art, or doing stuff like that where you want to integrate a character into a city, or add other models to a cityscape or to a landscape and stuff like that, or remove them, it means that you can play with those colors and not destroy the original image until you have to, until it's necessary. Now, one thing I want to do is composite a background behind this character, behind this model. And right now we only have this yellow background to work with. So I'm going to jump back into pixels and then grab any sort of background. So I'm just going to go with a random background and see what we can find. So in this case, maybe I'll go with something a bit more natural. Something like this would be kind of cool. Maybe I can go with the sky. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go with something random. So let's see. This sky will be fine. Let's just go with this one. Johannes Planillo. Thank you for the image. I'm going to download this image, save it into my my stock photos, and again, I'm going to go back into Photoshop and drag that in to my scene. Before I set it, I'm just going to scale it up so we have a bit of a background going on here. Like so. And you can see that right now the image is in the foreground, so we need to bring that layer down behind the model. But we have a problem, of course, is that the model has its own background. We need to remove that background. And we can do that in a non-destructive way. So the natural thing would be, the natural instinct would be to erase this manually or select it and delete it. And you know, there's plenty of tutorials that talk about doing it in that way. But we can use some cool stuff that Photoshop has now in the software that helps us remove that instantly without really having to do any effort on our part. And one of those things is the AI-driven selection tools. So you can see here that we have some selection tools here already, but the one we need is actually hidden away underneath these settings, unfortunately. So we need to go ahead and find it. And that would be the object selection tool, or the quick selection tool. Actually, the magic wand is the one I'm looking for. So try and find the magic wand tool, and you'll see that we have this option called subject select. And as long as you have that layer selected, subject selection actually is an AI-driven selection where it actually detects faces in your image and allows you to select it and then mask it out. So you can see here that just by pushing this button with the magic wand tool, and it actually is fucking magic, it's actually selected exactly what I intended to select out of this image, which is super, super cool. Now, what I can do with this selection made, is mask it out. So a mask is basically a black and white value. So if you're familiar with 3D, similar to Substance Painter, you're creating masks. It will create a black and white mask to cut out that image. Super, super cool. And what you can do after that, you can refine it after the fact. So you can see here that next to this image now is this mask. And this mask can be edited just like any other image. So I can actually use black and white values to bring back her ears, for instance, or her hair, or remove that remaining yellow parts. Or before I delete it, I can actually expand out that mask a little bit. So if I go to selection, modify, for instance, expand, and I make it expand by 1 pixel. Actually, I might have it contract. Contract is the better option. So go to select, modify, contract by 1 pixel. Let's redo that mask. That's cut out a lot of that yellow already, which is really cool. Now, if I want to bring back that ear, I can use a paintbrush with a black and white value. And as long as I have this selected here, I can always paint back that ear with a white value. Which is super cool. And I can use a feathered brush to make it, transition a bit better, that sort of thing. And I'm being pretty quick and dirty here because it's just a demo of the software, and the potential you have here of that software is super cool. That's why I want to bring this up. Now, let's make that brush a little softer. Just soften out that blur, because she has blurred ears a little bit. That's fine. And I could go in and, clean up those a little bit further, but, for our purposes, this will do fine. Now we have a few issues with this whole thing at the moment. And the thing that makes an image feel like it's integrated properly is basically the color grade. Now, right now, we can tell that the color grade on the figure is definitely a lot different to the color grade in the background. Another thing that's also worth mentioning is that the background, because the ears are blurry, I might blur that background a little bit as well. But let's try and fix up this color grade on this figure to feel like it's more integrated into that sort of dusky sort of color. So I'm going to bring back this color balance again. And it's already looking more integrated as we speak. The only problem now is that this color balance is affecting the entire layer, this entire thing, because adjustment layers actually affect everything that's underneath it, similar to a modifier stack in Blender for those who follow my videos. So what we need to do is find a way to get this adjustment layer to only be affecting this one layer. And that's pretty easy to do, to be honest. All you got to do is select that adjustment layer and then hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard and you get this little icon. Now, as long as you have that mask there and you hold down Alt, it actually subsets this whole adjustment layer inside of just that layer there. So it's no longer affecting that background, which is super cool. And even then, if I want to go back to the original image, it's completely non-destructive. So I can actually technically turn off this mask, disable layer mask. And you can see the original image is still in one piece, and I can always go back to that original image without ever destroying it, which is super cool. So now all I gotta do is adjust my adjustment layer somewhat to feel like it's part of that scene a little bit more. And we're on our way, which is really cool. Get those pinks in there, get those yellows in there, in the highlights maybe. And you can see that, it's coming together pretty nicely. Big difference from this very yellow character. Now she has those purple undertones that belong that are a part of that original background image, which is super cool. Now, if I want to make this blurry, I could use a smart layer. So this is actually a smart layer already. So this thing, let's go back to how to create a smart layer. If I rasterize this layer, for instance, and create a smart object, basically what it was before, I can technically non-destructively add a blur. So if I go to filter, blur, in this case, I might go with lens blur. Oh no, you can't do lens blur with a smart layer. Let's just go with a Gaussian blur for now. And soften out that background. You can see that we can start to add a little bit of blur to that image and help that character sit in there a little bit more. Another cool thing with this is where you would actually have to create a duplicate. You can actually go ahead and blur that hair a little bit to soften that up, etc, etc, etc. But you can see here that so far, none of this stuff is permanent. None of this stuff is permanent. If I delete this, if I disable this layer mask, it's not gonna delete the image. And even this blur now with a smart filter is not even permanent on that image there as well. So what we can do is always go back to that original state, which is super cool with Photoshop. Again, couple that with the AI-driven algorithm that helps you select things, you can do this stuff almost instantly, which is why you end up paying for the software, essentially. That's the advantages here. Now, the reason I bring this up is also because my students are studying Photoshop. So if you ever chose to want to, say frame this inside, a larger context, or, mask this thing into like a little icon or something like that. Say you're doing a mock-up of a website or a mock-up of an interface where you have a character face icon on an interface, you could do something like this where you end up grouping these edits into a group. So now the whole thing is just one piece, but then you can actually add an additional mask on top of that. So using just a basic selection like an elliptical marquee, I can hold down that and then create a mask like so. Now, the cool thing about this even further is that you can still effectively scale or you can effectively scale the whole group without worrying about the mask. So let me just show you how that works. So let's go ahead and do that. So for instance, I'm going to scale that entire group. Let's scale it down all the way down so I have some background to work with. So let's add a circle. And then we can mask that out again. So what we end up having is this nice little, I guess you can say like a profile picture. If for instance, you're doing a mock-up of a UI or a mock-up of a website or something like that you need to do very quickly. This is the power of doing Photoshop, using Photoshop for early concept design or just creating content for whatever means. Because then you can add extra filters on this, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. And again, just play with it in different ways. So for instance, if I wanted to edit this even further, I can add another adjustment layer, for instance, like, I don't know, a posterized filter. Let's go with this, the other one, sorry, posterized is this one, I think, there it is. And you can essentially create some cool stuff dynamically like that as well. Now you can always desaturate as well on top of that. So for instance, you wanted to make this black and white, like a sort of black, a grayscale sort of setup. Again, just go to your adjustment layers, add a desaturate, choose saturation, scale it down. And again, you can get this sort of stamped tool with your posterize. And you can change the way it stacks as well. So if you only want to have like black and white, you can do stuff like that too. That's the power here. That's the reason why you use this software. It makes concept development really quick. It's powerful and it's dynamic. So again, I can always go back to that original image if I want to. So I can turn it off, turn this off, turn off the mask, turn off the color balance, turn off the mask again. And you can see we're going back in time to those two original images that haven't been affected in any way, which is super, super cool. So that's the gist of using, like, that's my introduction to Photoshop. That's sort of my I guess, my exploration of why it's really useful, why it's cool, why it's awesome, and why people pay for it. Essentially, that's it. So you'll find myself doing a few of these sort of demos in the future. I'll be talking about stuff like screenwriting software in more depth, storyboarding, even illustration, like vector illustration, which is great for it. It's really useful for 3D as well. So I'll show you how you can apply that. Some basic video editing, you name it. It'll all come up eventually. But that's my spiel for this one. I suggest you go and check this out, explore it. It's really cool stuff. And yeah, feel free to list in the comments what you think about Photoshop, why you use it, why it's awesome. In any case, I'm gonna leave you to it. And all I'm gonna say is catches and have fun. Cheers.